Likely some of the greatest games that I was ever involved in, playing head-on-head against him. You always had to be aware of him out on the ice. Wasn't flashy, skated in straight lines, but got the job done and was tougher than a night in jail.
And first time that I met him, we went in the penalty box together. God, I thought, he's quite a gentleman. He stood there and opened the door for me in the Olympia in Detroit, and I thought, well, he's not that bad. So I went in and sat down. We sat next to one another. He never offered to elbow me or high stick me in there. And when the penalty was, I knew as soon as the penalty was up, why he let me in first. Because when the door opened, he went out, and then he slammed the door on me. And I knew then that he was all business.
There is a man in NHL history who was known off the ice as the kindest, most soft-spoken person in the locker room. Gordie Howe signed autographs for children, smiled warmly at strangers, and never started a fight without reason. But the moment he stepped onto the ice, something changed. His teammates saw it. His opponents felt it. A silver-haired man in a Hartford Whalers jersey, muscles still rippling at 51 years old, standing between his two sons on the ice. That image alone was enough to make grown men nervous. As Paul Henderson once said, he was built like a bull, mean as a cobra, and you had to walk on eggshells around him. To understand how feared Gordie Howe truly was, you have to start with the night of February 1st, 1959, at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Detroit Red Wings were visiting the New York Rangers, and on that Rangers roster was Lou Fontinato, the most feared enforcer in the entire NHL at the time. Fontinato was the first player in league history to accumulate 200 penalty minutes in a single season. The press called him the toughest man on ice. He had spent years provoking Howe, and had once struck him across the head with his stick, leaving a wound that required 6 stitches to close. That night, a skirmish broke out behind the Rangers' net. Howe stepped in to protect his teammate. Fontinato saw his opportunity. He charged at Howe like a freight train, throwing punches with everything he had, convinced this was the moment he would finally end the legend of Mr. Hockey in front of 18,000 fans. What happened next became one of the most retold stories in hockey history. Howe slipped the first punch, grabbed Fontinato by the collar with his left hand, and began driving his right fist into Fontinato's face with the mechanical rhythm of a hydraulic piston. Players on the ice later described the sound as an axe splitting dry wood. Within 30 seconds, Fontinato's nose was broken, his jaw was dislocated, and his reputation as the toughest man in hockey was destroyed permanently. Terry Sawchuk, the legendary goaltender who witnessed everything from the opposite end of the ice, said afterward, "I had never seen a fight like that since I entered hockey. They just stood there and hit each other with everything they had." The message sent to every player in the league that night was simple and devastating. Do not challenge Gordie Howe, unless you are willing to have your face rearranged completely. By the 1979 to 1980 season, most of Gordie Howe's contemporaries had long retired to golf courses or coaching benches. Howe was 51 years old and still playing professional hockey, this time for the Hartford Whalers, alongside his two sons, Mark and Marty. In a game against the Toronto Maple Leafs, star forward Lanny McDonald made a mistake that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He shoved young Mark Howe hard into the boards. What McDonald did not know was that for Gordie Howe, the ice was his territory, and family was the one line no opponent could ever cross. As McDonald skated back toward his own zone, he heard the sound of blades cutting ice behind him, closing fast. Before he could turn around, an elbow landed squarely across the bridge of his nose. The impact was so violent that McDonald described being temporarily blinded by a sudden rush of tears and blood. Then he heard a calm, low voice beside him. Lanny McDonald recalled the moment years later. Gordie just leaned close and said, "Don't ever do that again." I tried to say yes to sound tough, but what came out was a high-pitched squeak. It was the least masculine sound I have ever made in my life. At 51 years old, Gordie Howe was still fast enough to hunt down players 20 years younger, and still powerful enough to make them squeak. Not even the greatest player who ever lived was exempt from Gordie Howe's rules. In 1978, during a World Hockey Association game, a 17-year-old Wayne Gretzky found himself on the same ice as his childhood hero, who was 50 years old at the time. Before the game, Gretzky noticed Howe winking at him repeatedly and took it as a friendly gesture from a legend. What he did not know was that Howe had suffered a severe brain injury in 1950 and had developed a chronic, involuntary eye twitch as a result. When play began, Gretzky used his extraordinary instincts to strip the puck clean from Howe's stick and skate it away. Howe's response was immediate. He swung his stick and brought it down hard across Gretzky's wrist. Gretzky later recalled on television, "I just mumbled, 'Yes, sir, I will never do that again.'" Then there was Howie Meeker. During a game in the 1950s, Meeker slashed Howe across the leg and assumed the matter was settled. Howe said nothing. He simply waited. Later in the game, one precisely placed elbow sent Meeker's tooth skidding across the ice. The referee stopped play so everyone could search for it, without success. 20 years later, every time Howe saw Meeker, he would smile and ask, "How is that new tooth treating you, Howie?" Gordie Howe operated by a code that every player in the league eventually learned, sometimes the hard way. There were invisible boundaries on the ice that belonged to him, and crossing them carried a guaranteed price. During the 1974 Summit Series, Soviet superstar Valery Kharlamov attempted one of his trademark dazzling rushes, cutting through the space between Howe and the net. It was a move that had left defenders across 2 continents helpless. Against Howe, it earned him a thunderous 2-handed stick slash that stopped him cold. Howe explained it afterward with complete calm. He made a fatal mistake. He tried to skate through the gap between me and the net. That is forbidden territory. Then there was Stan Mikita of the Chicago Blackhawks. During a heated moment, Mikita made the error of calling Howe "old man" within earshot. Howe did not respond. He simply waited for the next puck battle, removed his glove with quiet efficiency, delivered one clean punch directly into Mikita's face, put his glove back on, and skated away as though nothing had happened. Mikita described it years later. From that day on, I always called him Mr. Howe. There were 20,000 people in that arena, and I was the only one who saw that punch. He was just too fast. Howe never needed an audience. He only needed the moment. Gordie Howe scored 801 goals in the NHL and played 1,767 regular season games. Those numbers can be admired, studied, and eventually surpassed. But what cannot be replicated is the atmosphere he created simply by being on the ice. He never started trouble without reason. He never forgot a debt. And he never, in 5 decades of professional hockey, allowed anyone to take what was his without consequence. That was his code, and every player from every generation understood it. It was that code, more than any statistic, that allowed him to compete at the highest level until the age of 52. As his longtime Detroit Red Wings teammate Ted Lindsay put it, Gordie earned everything he ever got on that ice with sweat and with blood. The records belong to history. The fear belonged only to Gordie Howe.